Boom. Ugly mug. Okay. Today's learning is a schus for a couple of different things. I just want to quickly get it through. So, Le'iloi Nishmas Yitzchak Moshe ben Yehudi Yoshua HaKohen Alav Shalom. As a schus for Shlema for Esther Sarah Bas Chaya Pesel, Dov Mordechai ben Beila Sheva, Elisheva Shena Bas Adina Edel, and Yeshua for Shidduch for Shulamis Chana Leah Bas Rachel, and Shalom ben Malka Roiza.
And also for Ava Shlomit Bat Ilan Esther.
Ava Shlomit Bat
Ilan Esther.
Ilana Esther. Ilana Esther.
Ilan Esther.
Can I get a report?
Yeah, sure, man.
Hadara Sarah Bas Pesilaya.
Hadara
Sarah
Bas
Pesilaya.
Pesilaya. All right. So, guys, send me the names so that way in the future I'll just have it, and I just write them on the inside of my Gemara.
I want to make one for today too. My friend's brother's yurtzeit. You know his yurtzeit is today? Remember Jonas Lieberman?
Yeah.
Jonas, Jake's brother Jonas. It's his yurtzeit today.
Can you send me the name, or just say the name?
He's in Israel.
Oh, okay. So whatever. When you get it, you'll tell us. Okay. Yeah. I feel like our learning is going to save some people, so let's make it happen. Okay. Either way, says the Mishnah on Daf Chaf Amud Beis. Okay. Up until now, we're starting the last parak of Seder Mayed. By the way, just FYI, this is the last parak of the entire Seder, so that's very exciting. It's really not the start of a new topic because really we've been in the middle of this Tumatara stuff really for the last couple of daf, 2.5, 3 blot of the second parak. But it's starting a new Mishnah, a new idea over here. It's going to be a list. We're going to see, depending upon two opinions in the Gemara, it's either going to be a list of 10 or 11 distinctions between Hegdish and Shruma. I got it. Hegdish and Shruma when it comes to the laws of Tumah and Tahara. Meaning, there's a Chumrah that's going to exist by Hegdish that will not exist by Truma. Now, we saw in the earlier Mishnah those three halachos of whether one needs to wash their hands or be tovel in them, and you're tovel your hands, or if you need kavana when you're going to the mikvah, or if you, what was the last one over there about the tumas medrus, that a person who watches it for truma, it's not going to be enough for hegdish, and if a person who washes for hegdish, it's not going to be enough for mechatas. We already saw some examples where there's a distinction between truma and hegdish. Tosfos asks why aren't all three of those listed in our Mishnah? Because if our Mishnah is supposed to be a list of distinctions, it should be there. It's a discussion. But the point is that our Mishnah is going to be a list. The list is going to get broken down into really two parts. The first half, and I'm sort of giving a little bit of foreshadowing of the Gemara so that as we go through the Mishnah, we can point it out. The Gemara is going to make an observation that although all of the dinim in the Mishnah are almost all, I think, 100% are all dinim derabanan, some of the dinim derabanan are dinim derabanan of a derabanan, meaning a rabbanan of a rabbanan, and some are a rabbanan of a deraisa. And so we're going to sort of break the group into those two, and as we go through it. Another thing that just to pay attention as we go through the Mishnah, and again, oftentimes in the beginning of a parak, the Rishonim tend to focus a lot more on the structure of a Mishnah, whereas later on in a parak they don't. They ask a lot of questions over here about the why in some distinctions did Hegdish be mentioned first, then Truma is mentioned second, and in some scenarios Truma is mentioned first, and Hegdish is mentioned after. I don't have good answers for that. Just want to point it out, something to notice as you're going through. Either way, says the Mishnah as follows. Chomer b'kodesh mi b'truma. We're going to list off the chumras, some chumras that exist by Hegdish that don't exist by Truma. What's the first one? Shematbilin kalim b'soch kalim l'truma avalo l'kodesh. So what we're discussing over here is, let's say I have a kli. Imagine I have a bowl and I want to take the bowl and put it in another bowl. Can I take one bowl and put it in another bowl and dunk it all together in the mikveh? What would be the reason why not? Mikvah is good. It should work. So we'll see in the Gemara two different opinions. This is the one case where there's actually two opinions. One opinion, like the rabbi just mentioned, the opinion of Weiler is because it's a chatzitza, because we're concerned that the weight of the top kli is too heavy and it's going to weigh down onto the bottom kli and create a connection between the two that won't allow the water to seep under it. So therefore, each vessel is not completely immersed. And you end up having a problem of a chatzitza. A discussion with the Rishonim over here is this only a concern for the top kli and the bottom kli for sure is okay? Does it make a difference if the bottom kli is tahor or tamei? That's a discussion with the Rishonim as well. But the point for us is that it's a chatzitza and therefore it shouldn't work. Now the truth is it's not a chatzitza, meaning halachically min haTorah that is an absolutely good 100% kosher tevila that would work.
Right.
What we're discussing over, because it's not really a chatzitza, meaning the water it gets it lifts it up, there's buoyancy, whatever it is. Now obviously I think if you drop a 60-pound dumbbell into the mikvah, I mean, and something's
Goes
under
right to
it,
the bottom,
it goes
yeah.
right to the bottom. It could be that it might be, but I think even there, water on a microscopic level is able to get even slightly in. But even if not, halachically we treat that as not a chatzitza. But the reason why it's usher is because midrabanan we're choshesh that it's domo lechatzitza. Rashi says. So the issue is like this. So by truma, we're going to say it's okay, no problem. We're not makbid for this din derabanan. But by hegdish, which is a higher madreg of kedusha, we want that immersion to be on a little bit on the tzad hayoser tov. So therefore, we decided to say over there we're going to make the yisr. Again, that's going to be sort of the formula for each one of these. Now that's the sheet of Reb Eilah. There's another sheet in Gemara. I'll just give it to you now. So when we get there, which is, and then we'll explain the details when we get there. But that really over here, what we're discussing is a problem that on its own, really midrabanan, there's nothing wrong with. This is a perfectly good. It's a chatzitza and tvila, and even midrabanan, it should be fine theoretically. It's that there's a special gzeira that it's very similar to another case, which when we get to the Gemara we'll explain. So Rava argues with Reb Eilah as to the reason for this case. The reasons for all of the rest of the cases, everyone's going to agree with. In this case, it's a machlokas. Is it chatzitza or is it a gzeira? We'll get to it in the Gemara.
So
Okay, that's
tip all your stuff in the fork, the forks, the spoons. They could touch.
they could touch, but really it's ideally better not to. Meaning it sounds like
go in a basket.
Yeah,
Shake them around.
move them around a little bit. Yeah,
Sometimes
You just want to get. You just want to make. Yeah, it's hard, especially Ideally, you shouldn't just dump it in because not really. But again, you have to imagine that like with forks and spoons and knives, the weight of those items are not so heavy. The likelihood is that they'll float somewhat. They'll move around, so you'll probably get water to everything. Whereas if you're talking about something that's very heavy on top of something else that's very heavy, like I don't know, a soup pot or something on top of a platter, you put that straight in, it's very possible that it's only going to get there. Another question that people don't realize, this is less a mikvah shiloh, this is just a practical shiloh. People don't realize it's not enough to put the item with kalim into the mikvah, completely submerge it. Water has to touch every part of the kli, which when you think about it, if you're turning the kli over, you always have to be careful to make sure that the water fills up the kli. Because a lot of times if you put something in, there will be an air pocket.
Yeah, correct.
The air pocket that comes inside the kli will float at the top, and you'll never actually end up having the kli. You got to really you have to be a little bit of a chacham.
Then they sink.
Yeah, exactly. If it's not sink, that's exactly what you want to notice.
It has to be one time.
Yeah. Water has to be around it all at the same time.
Agala can be.
Agala is different. Agala is different.
Yeah. Pour over Hagala?
No, Agala is for kashering. That's a different thing. You just have to hit every part of it at some point. Yeah. Okay, that's the first case. Yeah, that's for kashering, not for making something.
All
tough.
water, all water.
Can you kasher with water?
Yeah, with
It
water.
just with the same way it became trade. You wanna, what is it? Kimbolo kachpolto is what the most. Okay, says the Mishnah Vayter. Second case, achoyrayim, the outside, vistoch, and the inside, ubesat svita, and we'll touch that as the handle. We're talking here about a kliya vessel. So different parts of this vessel. Let's say. Part of it became tamei. Do we say that the entire thing became tamei? It's important to understand that we're not talking about, to my understanding, we're not talking about just a simple kli when it comes to entire min haTorah. It's enough for the kli to it won't be matama the entire kli if only a part of the kli becomes tamei. You just have to be matire that portion of the kli. Whereas midirabanan for hegdish, we're going to require that it all is viewed together. So if it touches the outside, it's no different than if it touches the inside or if it touches the handle. But that's only going to be true for hegdish. For truma, you do not have that requirement. Says the Mishnah Vayter, a third case, hanoiseas hamedras. So we touched on this in the Mishnah a little bit. Noseas truma avalo esakodesh. So what's this talking about? So we're going to try to keep it simpler. So the general halacha by tumas medras. Remember, tumas medras is the idea that there are a couple of different types of tumas. People who are an av hatuma, a nida, a zav, a zava, yoledes, and a mitzora maybe. Mitzora has unique halachas. But tumas medras is the idea that anything that they put their weight on, whether it's a chair cushion, a couch, shoes is an example because they're walking on shoes, anything they put their weight on, that item does not take on like the next status down of like a rishon. Whereas if a nida touches I don't know, let's say they touch a kli, that kli becomes a rishon. And then that kli touches a piece of food, that food becomes a sheni, like we've been discussing. Medrash is unique. Medrash is unique because anything they put their weight on, it's not viewed like it becomes tamei through a transfer. It's like it's still an av. The tumas medrash and the item itself is an av. So sort of like a gremlin, like you kill it and two pop out, right? Like you touch that medrash is an av, whatever, yeah. Like, so there. Now, what's the point? The point is that means if you have someone who's walking, holding a medrash item, let's say holding a pillow that was or neither woman sat on, or Rashi says here a shoe that is of war. So the shoe that is of war is a medrash. It's an av hatumah. It's no different than the zav himself. So that means if I'm holding it in my hand, so then obviously I'm a rishon l'tumah now. And let's say I'm holding in my other hand, I have a basket of truma or a basket of hagdish. So what is that kli? A kli, like an adam, cannot become a sheni. So therefore, the kli is not tameh, right? Because a kli can only become a rishon. I'm a rishon. Now I go touch a kli, that kli is fine. But what if I'm holding the medrash and holding the kli? Then there's a unique halacha that the kli also becomes a rishon. It's called tumah b'chiburin. So my body and the kli, which are really equivalent in Hilchos Tumah V'Tara in terms of the level of tumah. So my body and the kli become a tumah, become a rishon. Now, if it becomes a rishon, then what's inside of it could potentially become a sheni, let's say, right? So what we're discussing over here is that if I'm holding a medrash, and here Rashi points out that if it's a regular metal kli, this is going to be true for truma and for hegdish. Even hegdish is going to be, even truma is going to be tummy because of the way I just described it. So Rashi explains over here what we mean, and it's not even Rashi, it's the Bach changing the Girsa and Rashi and the Gemara, is that we're talking about what type of kli are we discussing here? We're talking about like pottery. We're talking about kli cheres. Kli cheres is different than metal. Cheres is like earthenware. Yeah. So it has a unique halacha, whereas metal, glass, let's say, the way it becomes tameh is by touch, putting something in it. Once it touches it, tumas, a kli cheres has a unique halacha. If tumah comes on the outside of this kli, it doesn't make it tameh. The only way a kli cheres can become tameh, very interesting. It's called the chalal, the airspace inside the kli, inside the vessel. So if I drop a sheretz or I hang a sheretz into the interior of a kli cheres, it becomes tameh. Right here, this would become tameh without touching. Just the airspace, the klita of the airspace makes it tameh. So now what we're discussing over here is
an earthenware vessel. You're talking about.
Yeah, specifically by an earthenware vessel. So here you have
Can it make tahar afterwards or no? It's
yeah, the only way you make a kli cheres tahar is by breaking it and then reconstituting it.
Right. Breaking it up.
Right. It's not
Okay. So now I have this kli. In one hand I'm holding this kli cheres, and in the other hand I'm holding the shoe of the zav. I'm bringing a shoes to him or whatever it is, or I have a mattress. Something that a person who is an avatuma of a zav that has the tumas medrash makes that item an ava. Now I'm holding an avatum in my hand, making me a rishon, but this kli can't become tameh just because I'm a rishon, because it's a kli cheres. Only what's inside it, right? So let's say I have some truma inside there, or I have some kodesh inside there. So even though this medrash, has not been entered into the airspace of this vessel, and so therefore minat Torah, it's completely Torah, says the Mishnah, when it comes to hegdish, if I'm holding hegdish, there's a chumr derabanan, the hegdish is tameh, midarabanan.
In the other hand.
Even though I'm holding the medrash here and the hegdish here in a kli cheres, it's like, try to imagine it's like the tumah flows through my body, and even though this normally prevents it because it's a kli cheres, but for hegdish we're going to be makbid to say that no, with the rabbanon it's going to be tameh. But if it's truma inside, you're good to go. That's what the Mishnah is basically saying. Okay. All midrabbanan. Everything in the Mishnah is midrabbanan.
Deraisa is still fine.
Yeah. Now you'll notice the three cases we've seen so far are derabbanans of a deraisa, meaning chatzitza is a deraisa halacha. Same thing with the second one and the third one. Here we're talking about medrash, which is deraisa. Says meaning sometimes the rabbis will make for instance, lighting candles on carrying on Shabbos is a class. Well, carrying on Shabbos is deraisa. But the requirement to do Eruv is a din derabbanan.
Right.
Or lighting candles for Shabbos is a din derabbanan. That's not because of something, right?
Lighting candles for Shabbos derabbanan?
Yeah. Meaning the ideas are predicated on ideas that are min haTorah, but
it's the whole thing about
Nero Shabbos is entirely. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. If you light them too late, you're over on a lot of deraisa. The mitzvah itself is derabbanan.
So medrash is all.
Medrash itself is a majorly deraisa. What we're discussing here is a din derabbanan within, this, like a classic example of a fence that we typically talk about. Okay, fourth case. Big day oichle truma medrash l'kodesh. This was the din in the Mishnah we saw earlier, that if I'm someone who eats truma, right, and so therefore I wash my clothing for Tumah and Tahara that's relevant for someone who eats Truma, that's not going to be good if I hand it to someone who's eating a Hegdish, because it requires a higher level of Shmira. That's another example. But again, here you're talking about Medrash. Tumas Medrash is a Deraisa. This is the Rabbanon of a Deraisa. Loiki midas Hegdish, midas hatruma. A little interesting hakdama here. The Hegdish and Truma are not the same. Shebekodesh, and I think here there's a very balabatish explanation. We have this Mishnah listed all in one shot. But if you open up like Mishnayos, you'll see that this Mishnah is actually broken up into 3 separate Mishnayos. Mishnah 1 just ended, and now we're starting Mishnah 2. I believe. I think that's how it breaks up.
I've seen that before.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because, I mean, sometimes the Gemaras that are discussing these Mishnayos are going to be talking about all parts of these Mishnah. So the Gemara will list it off as one whole Mishnah when really it's broken down into separate Mishnayos. So many questions a lot of times can be answered just very balabatish in recognizing that this is not the true way the Mishnah was brought together and meant to be learned. It was meant to be sort of broken up into these units, but we just put it together like this. So therefore, it could be sometimes you'll have a Mishnah that'll have a certain order or use certain words, and once you realize, wait, 1 second, maybe this is the beginning of the second Mishnah, you start realizing, oh, that makes sense. Because all of a sudden, right here in the middle of the Mishnah, we have this introductory headline, Loike midas hegdesh midas truma. Would that really belong sort of like at the beginning of the first Mishnah, right? So, but if you understand that there's a break in the Mishnayos here, then that would help it a little bit.
I thought it was an art scroll mistake.
No.
I remember
Yeah.
one time
That's fine.
I said, what's going on here?
Yeah. You can't say that. They don't make any mistakes. Lo ki midas ha-kodesh, midas ha-truma. What's the distinction between kodesh and truma? So now we're on number 5. Shebekodesh, and here this is another halacha of chatzitza. Shebekodesh matir u'menagev u'matbil. When we're talking about hegdish, and here Rashi is very clear to point out, we're only discussing a very loose knot, not a tight knot. So we know, like, again, we'll use the mikveh when we know the women, when Hilchos Nida, they'll do the hour of preparation before, they'll comb out their hair, they use conditioner. Why are they doing that? To make sure that there are no knots in their hair, because their hair also has to get the water completely covering it. And if there's a knot, and the knot is very tight, or very sharp and tight, the water won't be able to get into the hair that's, let's say, tied up into that knot. So therefore, they want to make sure there's no knots. So to here, we're talking about knots. Let's say a person has a beged that has a knot, whatever it is, you have a beged that requires to go to the mikvah. So if the knot is super tight, min haTorah, that's a chatzitza. That's not what we're discussing here. We're discussing here a loose knot where halachically we would treat it as a non-chatzitza.
Why would it pertain to a beged? You're not going to the mikvah with beged.
You don't go into the mikvah with a beged, but begadim go to the mikvah. We nowadays, because Tumah Tahara is not something we're makbid for, and Mitzvah the base of English comes back, it'll be the case. But clothing is considered a vessel, and it can accept Tumah, and it requires going into the mikvah.
Even mattresses.
Yeah. Mikvahs are going to be pretty
Everything.
big.
Mattresses?
Yeah.
When?
If a Zav
English.
rests on a mattress,
Right.
you have
Is
to
there
take the
ever-
whole mattress and put it into a mikvah.
How?
Really?
Throw it
That's
out.
even worse.
How could you put
Big
a
mikvah.
What,
Big
throw it into the
mikvah.
ocean?
Big mikvah.
How?
You-
You have to throw it out. What do you mean? What are you gonna?
No, what are you
How are you
talking
gonna put a mattress in a mikvah?
about? You put it in, leave it out in the sun, let it dry.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Never heard
People
of it.
do that.
Well, if the unless mattress prices come down, and you could just throw it out and get a new one. I mean,
People do that.
not now. Once the people did that.
But what?
You have to understand, they didn't have mattresses the way we have mattresses. Their mattresses were just like blankets that they just piled on top of each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus they.
Is there ever a discussion when
They
it
didn't have
terms
the
of how
sort
thick
of
the knot
perfect
is?
sleep like you have, Colin.
You're saying that it has to be complete knots, and you're saying here that some of them are big. Is there ever a question if there's a small knot? And then-
Small knots. Again, when
I'm
it's
just
so
trying to
small that it's impossible to take out, you have to understand something. I don't want to get too far
Well,
down
I
this
didn't
road.
know-
No,
I
I don't
didn't
mind.
know
I'll just say very, very briefly. So when we discuss chatzitza, right? Chatzitza isn't just simply that there's something preventing the water getting there. It matters the person who is dipping in the mikvah, what they view that thing as. Like, let's say you have someone who they always wear their hair in dreadlocks. That's not a chatzitza, because that's how they wear their hair.
Mhm.
But if you don't wear your hair that way and it became knotty, now you have a problem. You know what I'm saying? Meaning, and again, I'm speaking about it in a generic sense. It matters how you view it, and it also matters how much of the item that has a chatzitza, how much of it. If most of your body is not a chatzitza, min haTorah, you're good to go. We say it has to ruvo. What is it, Rabbi? Ruvo makbid. Ruvo makbid. Most of your body covered in chatzitza, and you want it not to be there, then you have a
Temporary
problem.
clothing.
Yeah.
Temporary-
Right. Another example.
You're not makbid.
Okay.
Because you want adarabah. Not only are you not makbid, you very much want it to not be out. The last thing you would want to see is your fillings coming out. So it's considered now like part of your body as it comes to a chatzitza. And the same thing would apply, let's say, now again, that does not mean if a woman always wears her hair in a braid, that she should go into the mikveh with a braid. She should go with it out, because generally, although she says she wears it that way, but she doesn't sleep that way, she doesn't shower that way. So again, okay, so that's a little bit of a tangent. But the point is that here what we're discussing here is, let's say you have some clothing, a beged, some type of an item that has a rope or thread where there's a knot. The knot is a loose knot, so in HaTorah it's not a chatzitza. Says the Mishnah that when it comes to Hekdesh and Truma, there's going to be a different halacha when it comes to a loose knot. For Truma, we're going to say the following. Shibik Kodesh, when it comes to Hekdesh, Matir, you have to undo the knot. Minagev, you have to dry the clothing as best as you can so that there's no water. Rashi interestingly says that might be a chatzitza. That's a little bit of a problem, but we'll keep the conversation here for a second. Umatbil, and then you have to take the item and dip it in the mikvah, kosher, and only then can you tie it up again. Whereas ubetruma, no, you could take the thing and drop it right into the mikvah. Not only that, you can even tie it kosher. You can even you can go ahead and tie a knot and put it in. Meaning, again, these are all dinim d'Rabbanan that we were machmer for hekdesh and not for truma. So we just got to number 5, and like I mentioned, the first 5 of the Mishnah are, or maybe this next one also. Kalim hanigmarim b'tahara. So the rule is that a vessel does not become tamei, cannot become tamei until it's finished. Meaning, if let's say I walk into the blacksmith's office over there as he's fixing up a spoon, and he hasn't completely finished the process yet. If he's not completely finished the process, tuma cannot penetrate it. The same way that we talked about machshirin, that fruit can't become tamei until it comes wet. A vessel can't become tamei until it's finished and it's functional as a kli. Says the Mishnah, Kalim hanigmarim b'tahara. Let's say you, making this kli, are completely confident that no tamei has come into contact with this item. So that means at the moment when the kli was finished being fashioned, you have no doubt there is absolutely no tamei here. It is 100% tahor. And min haTorah, it is absolutely tahor. Says the Mishnah, tzrichim tefillah lekodesh avalo letruma. When it comes to the halacha of requiring a tefillah before usage, we have a din d'Rabbanan that by hegdesh you have to do a tefillah, whereas truma you can go ahead and just use the kli for truma. Number 7, hakli mitzaref mashe besochel lekodesh avalo letruma. If you have a vessel that contains within it, let's say apples, right? Let's say one of the apples are tamei, and it's not even touching the other ones, but they're just inside the vessel together, yeah? So are the other apples tamei? Or no, do we say that the apple that's tamei is tamei, and the ones that are not tamei is not tamei? So min haTorah, they're all separate, meaning unless they're touching. And even if they're touching, remember,
Right.
ochel can't become more than a sheni.
Right.
So if the thing that's in there is a sheni, then everything else in there is fine, right? So if that's the case, then min haTorah, you can pick up any of the other apples and be confident that you're not touching tuma for whatever reason you might use it. As long as you know which exactly. Otherwise, you have a bittul question, and then you're right. And if it's truma, you might have issues of 100 against 1. But the point is that says the Mishnah that if I have a vessel that contains within it 4 apples or something, and one of them is tamei, the other 3 are not, do I have to treat the other ones as tamei or not? No, because like we just explained, a sheni can't become a shlish, kulin can't become a shlishi. However, for hegdesh, we have a chumrah that a kli is sort of like, it's like it combines everything that's in the kli into one sort of status, and therefore anything that's inside of it, mid-rabbanan grabs a tumah status. And so if it's for hegdesh, you have to treat it that way. That means, by the way, just to clarify, the food that's in there, if it's a sheni, then you don't need to come on to this halacha, because for hegdesh you can make a shlishi and a revi'i, right? What we mean to say over here is, let's say something fell in that's a revi'i even. So there's a revi'i of hegdesh tumah in there, and it falls in with other hegdesh. That other hegdesh is not tamei mitzad the din of touching, because you can't make a chamishi and a shishi. But for this din d'Rabbanan, it would become tamei.
You let it eat it once it's tamei?
You and me, no, hegdesh that's tamei, you're not allowed to eat.
Not allowed to eat it.
Yeah.
I can't eat it either?
No, definitely not. Yeah, hegdesh
What do
that's
you do with it?
absolutely
You bring on the mizbeach?
burn it.
You
burn it. Yeah, outside the. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think you burn it. I don't know where you burn it. Do you know where you burn it?
Hegdesh with the stomach?
Yeah, you can't eat hegdesh.
Yeah, you got an avera.
Yeah, it's massive affair. You know, I mean, just like you're not allowed to go to the Beis Hamikdash when you're tamei, you're not allowed to eat hegdesh when you're tamei. Yeah. What do you?
Regular food could be eaten with.
Yeah, but that's different.
Cool,
Yeah.
that's cool, yeah.
Unless you're one of the religious guys.
The Prussian.
That's okay.
Right. What do you chayiv?
What?
Then
Hagdish?
karis. If you eat hagdish when you're tummy, you chayav
Hagdish
karis.
bad. If you make it,
Well, you're not even allowed to eat it. Only Cohen can eat it anyway, right?
Well, no,
Hagdish.
your shlomim you could eat. You can take your shlomim, and that's the chagiga, the shlomim, and then you can eat it. It's just when you eat it, you can't be tummy. If you're tummy, that's why.
So confusing.
What's that?
It's
bad.
confusing. all
Yeah,
this
but it's only confusing for us because we're describing behaviors that when we walk out of here, we don't
Right,
have to be concerned
Right,
about.
right. We don't.
I
right,
promise you,
right,
if we
right.
lived in the times of
Right.
Beis Hamikdash,
Right.
this would be like just as comfortable to you
Right.
as you are with.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah.
let the guy touch the flame. You can't light that on.
Right.
You would know it just as easily as you know the other stuff. Try to teach about tshuva the halachas of bishul akum. They're crazy, but to us they're not crazy because they're just it's normal to
Right,
us.
that's true. But you don't do. You don't.
Everything.
Okay, says the Mishnah Vayta. Eighth case. Harivi'i bekodesh pasel v'hashlishi b'truma. This is something that we discussed until now. This is Tumah Tara 101. We know that chulin can become a sheni, truma can become a shlishi, not a revi, and only hagdish can become a revi. So there's another chumrah over here. Ninth case. Ubetruma im nitmes achas miyadav. So here we're talking about the Tumah Derabanan of Yadayim. Remember, the person could be completely tahor min haTorah, but Derabanan, because hands are askanios, they move around. Therefore, we treat our hands always as if they're tamei midirabanan, and they're considered a sheni. Our hands have a status of a sheni. So if our hands have a status of a sheni, let's say only one of my hands
all the time. It's
all the time until you go and you wash.
Right.
Once you wash, you're good to go. But as soon as you have a hesach hadas, as soon as your mind is taken off of them, in Hilchas Tumah V'Tara, we're concerned that your hand starts moving around
So the
again.
very first thing, if you wake up in the morning, the very first thing you should do is wash your hands.
If you
Well,
Before you even go to the bathroom, right?
Modani first.
Modani first thing. And if it's not going to create a problem, shalom bayis, by leaving water next to your bed,
People do that. I've seen that.
yeshiva bachrim do it. I don't know any married people that do it, but
Right.
very
You say you
few.
do know married people?
I do not. But then,
Because the whole house.
yeah, the whole house is for amas, and so therefore you got to the bathroom, and then there's a halacha. If you have to go to the bathroom really badly,
Yeah.
then you have a variable tashchis. Well, tashchis is much
Oh,
worse.
Explain that.
That's
Like,
right.
meaning you can make yourself. It's an
That's
injury.
right.
Like you're causing yourself. It's not healthy for you to hold it in if you have to go really badly. So you're supposed to go to the bathroom.
Like in the middle of the night, you wake up.
Go to the bathroom. You don't
I
wash.
should count down.
Middle of the night, for other reasons you don't wash. No reason to wash.
You don't wash in the middle of the night.
No, meaning you have to go out of the bathroom.
I
You
go
wash.
to
Going right back into bed.
What?
I have to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, that's
Right.
different. Yeah, but not before.
But if you want to take a drink of water, you have to wash.
Yeah, because you have to make a bracha.
That's rough.
Before you take
wash,
a drink of
then you
at
have to
nighttime?
wash your hands.
If you're gonna make a
Yeah,
bracha on the water, you gotta wash first, because otherwise.
You're
Because
also not supposed to touch
The
your
water
eyes,
next to the
cover
bed is that you
everything.
should walk 4 hours.
That's
Is
right.
that right?
What's that?
The water next to the bed is that you
Right,
should.
but we're lenient to it.
Yeah,
Wait, how we wait?
The Shulchan Aruch
he doesn't
says,
understand the concept of lenient.
We're,
No,
we're,
no, I understand.
we're lenient that we let you walk to your bathroom to wash your hands, even though it's more than 4 hours. Really, you shouldn't be walking in the morning. We let you go to the bathroom.
But when you're in your home, your entire home, just like you can't walk outside on Shabbos 4 hours holding something, but we let you walk inside your house. Why? It's because your entire house is viewed as if it's like your Dalit Amos. Like it's considered like a conceptual extension of your space.
so I don't have to wear yarmulke in my own.
First,
Some
Should I
opinions
still
say
do
that,
that, Rabbi? It
but
was
that's
Donovan
not
Stitt.
halacha. That's not how we pass it. But yeah,
what's his name?
Michael.
Yeah. I remember when he
Donovan
came
used to come
down.
to
A
you.
lot of
You still like that, by the way? You still like a spare hustle?
No, he's calm down.
could be. I don't know.
That was a-
From-
Okay. Says the Gemara Vayta. Mishnah says, so what happens if I have, so again, my hands are dinder rabbanon a sheni. So if my hands are a sheni, right? So now what happens if I have one hand that's tummy, and I became washed, and one hand that came into contact with tumah, the other hand does not. Do we consider, so can I go take a piece of truma here and go eat it with this hand? This
We're
hand's
trying to
tummy?
compare it to the vessel. I'm saying having one item that's
Well, no, it's not a comparison. It's a separate case. Meaning, but what's the halacha? Meaning, midrabanan, my hands are shniyas. I go, I wash. My hands are tahor now. Okay, and then someone pushes me, and I end up touching something tummy. So now all of a sudden, my hand just became tummy.
Well, you
right?
went like this, like.
Well, okay, so I touched a part of my body that, let's say, makes me tummy. Yeah. Which is not so simple that's what it is. That's a little bit of a different thing. But the point is that I have one hand tummy, one hand's not tummy. So halach lamaisa, the whole thing's only derabanan. Of course, my other hand is still tahor. There's no question about it. There's nothing to talk about. And for truma, that's the case. For truma, the halacha is I can go pick up a piece of truma. But for hagdish, the halacha is we're makbid to say once one hand gets tummy, the other hand becomes tummy. Like we connect the hands. That's a din derabanan. Again, this is a very much din derabanan of a derabanan. This is what I was saying before about how the categories are split up here. Okay, so that's the ninth halacha. that ubetruma im nitmes achas miyad, one hand becomes tummy chaver to tahora. However, ubekodesh matbil, you need to go bitobel shneyan shayad matames chaver to bekodesh. One hand makes the other one tummy with hegdesh avalo betruma. Very long, wordy part of this Mishnah. But either way, the 10th and second to last one, ochlin, you eat ochlim neguvim, food that's dry, biyadayim misuavos, that are tameh, with hands that are tameh, bitruma avalo bekodesh. So just remind ourselves the din of machshirin, right? So machshirin is the halacha that in order for food to become tameh, it has to first get wet. It doesn't have to be wet when you touch it. So it's not like a transmission issue. It just means that at one point the food needs to become wet, and it has to become wet in a way that you want it to be wet or you want the water there. But the point is once that happens, now it's like the switch for tumah is turned on, and if tumah comes into contact with it, it'll become tameh. So now, what happens if you have something that's never become wet? So then it can't become tameh. Min Torah, there's no tumah. So we say like this: when we're talking about truma, it would be no different than anything else. The halacha is that it can't become tameh. So min Torah and midrabanan, there's no reason for there to be a concern. But for hegdish, we made a chumrah that even though it's not mukshel l'tumah min Torah, it's never come into contact with water. For hegdish, we're makbid to even eat it b'tahara when it hasn't come into contact with water. So if you have an item that's hegdish, that's never touched water, and then it touches something tameh, it's not tameh. It doesn't become, the tumah doesn't transfer, because tumah cannot transfer to something unless it's acceptable, it's vulnerable to tumah.
Fruit always becomes wet though.
And there's a cookie there. I could touch that cookie and it's still
Yes,
cool.
if the cookie's never been wet. I don't know.
Fruit and vegetables always become wet though.
No, the wet you're talking about is from the rain. That's a different story. Rain, once it's,
Heat does.
especially while it's
Connected
connected to the
yeah.
tree.
Does it go up that way?
You have to want the water.
Yeah, that's the other thing, right? So there's a couple more than two, but there's a couple of
But as
requirements.
Kevin just mentioned, if something became wet, even if it's dried off, you still have to worry about it.
Yeah. But only if the water that was on it was beneficial for you. So let's say the water that came on it cleaned the fruit for you.
Okay, yeah.
You're happy with it that it cleaned the fruit because now you can eat it. It doesn't have schmutz on it. That would be a problem. Whereas if, let's say, the water that's there, it's irrelevant to you if it caught on it or not, then that wouldn't be considered mokshel tzum. It's a complicated sugya, and honestly, it's a shame that there's no real gemaras on it because you can have a ton of fun with it. You can, once you start learning tumah and tara, and you realize once you get the basics down, it's actually very geshmak, very lumdish, very lumdish, because it's like, well, does that transfer? Does that not transfer? That a second? That's a sheni. That's a shlishi. It can get very geshmak. It's very, it's in a weird way. It's a lot easier even because it's almost entirely conceptual for us. You're able to really, it's more of a thought experiment than it is like, wait, what's
Practical.
Yeah, exactly.
Why is there no Gemara on it?
Mostly the reason I think why it wasn't written down was there was no Beis HaMikdash by the time the Gemara came around, and since there was no Beis HaMikdash, there wasn't a ton of reasons to write it down. And you have to remember, writing things down in general is something we generally don't want to do because there's an aveira. You're supposed to Torah Shabbat Peh is supposed to be Baal Peh. So if there wasn't a real reason to write it down, they didn't write it down. They only wrote those things down. Moed. Now you'll ask why was Kachim written down? I mean, there's no Beis HaMikdash writing down. Good question. I don't know. Okay, says the Mishnah Vayter. So that was the 10th one. That ochlin neguvim biyadayim misuavos b'truma v'lo b'kodesh. So the chumrah only exists by hegdish. It does not exist by truma, and therefore the halach is going to be okay. Now let's actually start off chaf aleph. Okay, says the Gemara. No, sorry, says the last line of the Mishnah. Ha'onein. What's an onein? An onein is a person who's lost a relative, a close relative, that they would become an avel, but it hasn't been buried yet. Big machlekes v'shainim. How far aninus goes? Is it just depending upon when the burial is? Is it only on the day when he dies? Is it only in the city where he dies? Okay, whatever it is, an onin, the halacha is midirabanan, even if he hasn't touched the dead body, even if he hasn't touched the dead body, so he's not an av hatumah. There's no rishon l'tumah here. He's min haTorah completely tahor. There's a din that an onin has to go to the mikvah that he has a din. There's a din tumah, a tumah derabanan as an onin. It's a din derabanan that he has to. I think he actually has to go to the mikvah. I think he might even have to bring a carbon. No, it's a din derabanan. No carbon. Just to go to the mikvah. So an onen and a mechusar kippurim.
Shiva? No, I mean.
It's before Shiva. It's the beginning of Shiva. An onen is the first step.
Go to the mikvah before
Yeah, goes to the mikvah. Yeah. Now, there's something called the mechusar kippurim. We'll keep this simple. So the same people before that we talked about that are to have a tumas medras, the zav, the zava, the nida, and the yoledes, or not the nida, the zav, zava, yoledes, and the mitzora, right? So those four people, they are what's referred to as a mechusar kippurim. What does a mechusar kippurim mean? So there are some types of tumah that are so stringent that the purification process includes within it a counting of days, typically Shiva days, 7 days. This is the reason why our wives count 7 days, is because we treat them like a zava. That's exactly what's going on there. So general rule is as follows. So you count 7 days. Once you no longer see any blood, let's say, or no longer see any lesions, you have 7 days. And in each one of these scenarios, at the end of that process, the 7 days, they have to go to the mikvah. They go to the mikvah, then the halacha is once they go to the mikvah during the 7th day, middle of the day, once they go to the mikvah, they can start eating Meiser Sheni. They can't eat Meiser Sheni before that. They can only eat chulin. Once they go to the mikvah during the day, they can have Meiser Sheni, but they can't have truma and they can't have hegdish. Then they have Herav Shemesh, which means nightfall. Nightfall of that 7th day, now they can even start eating truma, but they cannot have hegdish. So each one of these levels jumps up in age. Now, Herav Shemesh is the first Mishnah in Brachos. That's the Mishnah that says, what time you start to from the time that the Kohanim can start eating B'Trumasan. That's at the night of, it's always nice to see things sort of roll back together, like a weave back together. So that night, for these 4 people who have this counting of the week, they can start eating truma. If they're a kayan or a bas kayan, they can start having truma that night after the stars come out. Now that night they can't yet bring a carbon. They have to bring a carbon tomorrow. So at that moment, at night, they are what's referred to as a mechusar kippurim, because they have everything they need in terms of their responsibilities except for the carbon. The carbon can only be brought in the morning because the karbanos are only brought up during the day. So in that moment, they're a mechusar kippurim. So a mechusar kippurim cannot eat hegdish, but they can have truma. So that's what we're discussing over here, right? It says over here, ha'onan a mechusar kippurim tzrichin tefila lekodesh avalo letruma. So what we're saying over here is, let's say the next day, this guy goes, brings his carbon up in the morning. So l'chor, he's good to go. He should be able to have hegdish, right? So there's a special halacha, a din d'Rabbanan, that we say like this: that in the morning, after he brings his carbon, if he wants to now go have some hegdish, a bowl of cereal, cornflakes of hegdish, he's got to go to the mikvah. Second time. It's a din d'Rabbanan. It's a special halacha. Just like the onan has to go, so too this mechusar kippurim, but only to eat hegdish, not to eat truma.
I got a question. Does water generally transmits tumah?
Yeah,
It's funny. Water transmits and removes tumah.
So it's funny because, like I'm thinking about it, you come out of the mikvah, you're tahor, right?
Yes.
Okay. What about the water? What about the next person who goes into the mikvah? Like you're leaving your.
He has 40 hours. He has 40
Yeah,
hours.
it's good.
Good question.
It's a very good question.
Purifies the water.
What about your
No,
bar?
he's saying is all
Let's
the
say.
water's tummy. Is what he's saying. Your tummy, you
I
go
know,
in.
but the
What do you mean? What
I
about
was
your
waiting to go right after you to the mikvah.
What about your bar of soap in the shower? You use it to clean your body,
Right.
and then you got a bar of soap that's got dirt on it, and then the next time you go in, you're taking a dirty bar of soap, and using it again. I don't know.
Tummy, the soap is tummy.
No, I'm not talking about tummy. I'm talking about dirt. It's just
So a shower is different than a mikvah, though.
no,
A
one's a
mikvah-
spiritual, one's a physical. Same concept, really.
Uh,
Right? Meaning my soap is dirty, but I use it. So the answer is that dirty soap's not dirty. The answer is that whatever the antibacterial component of soap is that makes it clean. I mean, your question is a very good question. My answer is a terrible answer. Let me just clarify. Meaning, let me make your question even a little bit better. In halacha, when I wash my hands for bread, right? What's the reason why some people, you may have noticed, some people have very frum people, what they'll do. I'm sure your son does this. I'm sure your son does. I have no doubt your son does this. Ready? He goes to the kitchen, goes to the sink, and before he grabs the cup and fills it up to wash, he grabs a towel, dries his hands first. Does he do that? Does he dry? You ever see someone dry their hands before they wash? You're like, what is this guy doing? Why is he washing? Why is he drying his hands
I
beforehand?
gotta take notice of that.
Right? And don't say anything next time. Just pay attention. You can ask him. You want to give him a little bit of a. Because most of the reason why guys in yeshiva are doing it, myself included, is because I saw other people do it. So I was like, oh, I guess that's the fun thing to do. To dry your hands before you wash. Now, it's a Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish says you should do that. But the interesting thing is people quote this Chazon Ish, oh, you should do that. The Chazon Ish it's a much longer piece. The Chazon Ish says you're supposed to do that. Why? Why are you doing that? Because the problem is that if we're assuming your hands are tummy, and that's the reason why you're washing, or at least we're treating it like it's tummy. So that means the water that's on your hand is tummy, and then what's going to happen? It's going to touch the kli, which is wet also. That tumah is going to transfer. So then I'm going to have my right hand that's tummy. I'm going to grab, or my left hand that's tummy. I'm going to grab the kli. I'm going to turn the water on, fill it with water, and then I'm going to take the water that's in it and make my right hand, I'm going to wipe off all its tumah, right? But the handle of the kli, which my hand is tamei and wet, just became tamei because of the fact that my hand was tamei touched it. Now I hand it over to my right hand, and I just re-tummied up my right hand. What did I accomplish by pouring the water over? Now, granted, with our vessels, it's not such a big deal because there's two handles. So it could be the left one is held to the left side, and you're holding the right one with the right side, so the one's never touching the other. But really, technically, you're supposed to do that. This is the Chazon Ish says you're supposed to do that. But the problem is most people who dry their hands first don't realize if you dry your hand without drying the handle of the vessel, you haven't accomplished anything. Because the water on the handle is still going to be a problem. Who cares if it came from your hand or it came from the handle? Either way. But the whole din of the Chazon Ish is a major chumrah. The Mishnah Berurah and the Biur Halacha says he doesn't dismiss it, but he holds not like that. You don't have to be makbid for it. The whole thing to begin with is an atila midrabanan. There's many derabanans on top of the rabbanans over here.
Washing for bread?
Washing for bread.
And the purpose is to get all the tumah off your hands? I thought it was just symbolic, like.
Well, it is a symbolic reason why we do it, but once we do it, it's mirrored after the normal halacha of getting rid of tumah.
All the tumah off your hands?
That's why you're supposed to wash twice. The first time you wash is to get rid of the tumah, and the second time you wash is to get rid of the water that got rid of the tumah. And now your hands are good.
So interesting.
Unless you use a full revius each time. And if you use a full revius of water, which almost everyone does,
You gotta go to
because
the
the
wrist,
revius is-
something like that? You go up to the
yeah,
wrist?
up to your wrist, I think that's what they say.
And
But
then
if
one,
you,
can you just do, can you do without a cup? Are you allowed or you're not allowed?
I mean, ideally, you should do it with a cup. But the Evid, you're supposed to do a shif if you
It's much easier to get your whole hand, just put under the faucet.
Yeah, okay, so that's already, I'm not passing any showers. That's already, you wouldn't call that like it's
You don't
not
have a
fully
cup.
immersed.
Yeah, 'cause,
Yeah, a cup you need. The water needs to be collected.
I think some people say if you close off the spigot.
Yeah,
every time-
I've heard that.
But you're saying you said you have to get every part of your hand.
Yeah,
Every
yeah,
part of
yeah.
it. You need a lot of water.
But there
Except
is
the
no
tissue
Tumah
one.
Tahara anymore, right?
No, Tumah Tahara exists. It's never gone anywhere. It's just that we don't, we're
There's
not,
a big issue.
yeah, there's no base on Migdash, there's no.
So then what-
The whole nafkamina of Hegdish, of Tumah and Tara is specifically to be able to eat Hegdish. I mean, that's really Truma, Hegdish. Yeah, Tumah and Tara still
So
exists.
why do we even wash before bread?
If Tumah and Tara didn't exist, then our wives
So
wouldn't
why
have
do
to
we
make.
wash them before bread?
For this
No,
idea.
we spoke about it. Surach Truma, because of the Kohanim, when the Mitzvah Shem, the base English
But
comes
it's
back.
not. But right now, it's not.
What do you mean? There's a lot of things that are not right now that we do. I mean, why do we say karbanos in the morning? No.
It's a custom. It's
Halacha, but it's we. If by custom you mean we this is the way we behave, then yeah, it's a minhag. But I don't like the word custom. Custom is an English word. It's a minhag, maybe, but minhag is halach. Minhag is Torah.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so says the Gemara. So I sort of gave the foreshadowing of the Gemara. The Gemara goes pretty smooth. We listed off 10 or potentially 11, right? Depending upon, well, we'll see in a second. There's 11 cases in the Mishnah. Says the Gemara. Bikodesh, the first case, which is talking about one kli inside another kli, my time alone. Why is that a problem? What is the reason that's a problem? Now, I sort of gave the answer when we read the Mishnah. It's because one's heavy and there's a chatzitza.
Right.
Amar Rabbeila, mipnei shekfeidah shel kli chotzets. The heaviness, the weight of the kli makes it a chatzitza. It makes it a separate separation between the two kalim, and the water can't get to the keli. Says the Gemara, 1 second. I already have a case of chatzitza later on with the tying of the knot situation. If you're going to tell me that there's a chumrah in Hegdish more than by Truma when it relates to the ideas of chatzitza, I know it already from a future case. The Katani Seifa. Later on it says, V'lo ki midas Hegdish midas hatruma shebekodesh matir u'menagavu matbil. That for Hegdish you can not put it straight into the mikvah, but rather you have to untie the knot, dry it, and then only then can you stick it back in the mikvah, and then va'achakach kosher retie it. Whereas ubetruma kosher va'achakach matbil, there you can not only drop it right in, you can even tie it lechatchila and stick it in, because as long as it's not tied too tight, it's not considered a chatzitza. So what do you see? Reisha v'seifa mishum chatzitza, right? They're both because of chatzitza. What are you telling me? Well, actually, really, the right way to read this is it's a question. So if the reish is mishum chatzitza, then what do I need this for chatzitza? Once you're telling me that for chatzitza the chumrah of hegdish exists and the chumrah of a truma doesn't exist, it's a repetitive case. The Gemara says no, I need both. Reish is seifa mishum chatzitza. They're both chatzitza according to Rabbeila. Why? Utzricha, and I need both of them. And the Gemara is going to explain why each one of them is unique that I wouldn't have learned out from the other one. Says the Gemara, Di'i ashmi'in and reisha. If I would have taught the case of one kli inside another kli, havyamina hainu taima de lekodesh lo. Why by hegdish is it not going to be good enough? Mishum kivedo shel kli, because there's this unique concept of one kli being so heavy that it really creates a chatzitza. De'ika, that it exists, that concern is there. Aval seifa, the case later on by the knot tying the leka kvedah shel kli, I might say that, well, halacha l'maisa min haTorah, that's certainly not a chatzitza, it's a loose knot. So what's the real concern here? What's the reason why this chatzitza would be considered a chatzitza? Maybe I would say that level of chatzitza, even for hegdish, would be okay. So therefore, I might say Emel Kodesh Nami Lo Havi Chatzitza. And therefore, the other way, V'yashmin and Seifa, if I would teach the din of the Seifa, Havi Amina, Hainu Taima de Lakodesh Lo. Why is it in the case of the not tying that over there you can't do it? Because Mishum, everyone knows this, the Kitra B'maya Haduke Mahadik. Anyone knows if you ever get your shoelaces when you're running a marathon, if they get wet, good luck trying to untie the double knot. It's so tight when the wet gets wet, you can't open it up, right? So if the net, so I might think Dafka there is that a Chatzitza, Midarabanan, Aval Reisha, where all you're talking about is one thing sitting on top of the other despite its weight. I would say Aval Reisha, the Maya, where the water, Akfuye Makfile Lamana, it might elevate it. The buoyancy of the water and the Kli will allow the water to get under it, and therefore that's not a chatzitza. I have a chatzitza, therefore it's tzricha. I need Reb Ela, right? What's that?
Can't make a double knot on Shabbos, right?
Well, that's a separate halacha.
That's a
Yeah,
separate
yeah,
halacha.
yeah. But yeah, it's true. Yeah. So therefore, tzricha, I need both cases. Okay, and Reb Ela, who was learning the first case, is talking about chatzitza. Comes out that the 11 cases of the Mishnah, 2 of them are really the same reason. It's just that I need both because there's a unique difference in the 2 of them. Yeah, he just forgot to close the Oh, he's here?
Okay.
Reb Ela Latame. Reb Ela, who says that the first case is Mishum Chatzitza, and really it's sort of a repeat of a later halacha that only for a tangential reason is it being mentioned, is Latame, meaning he's going in his, he's consistent with another statement of his. The Amar Reb Ela, Amr B'Chanina Bar Papa, Eser Malus Shanukan. Really, this Mishnah, which we just counted as 11, he says really it's 10. But that's consistent. According to him, there's really only 10 ideas really being stated here. The Chamesh Rishonos, the first 5, Bein LeKodesh would apply for Hegdish, Bein LeChulin Shenasu Al Taras HaKodesh, as well as when you have those very different people who would treat their Chulin like Hegdish. So we said before that whether that's considered Hegdish or not is a discussion in the Chulin. But over here, what we're saying is the first 5 listed, the Chumrah of Hegdish over Truma will apply not only to actual Hegdish, but even to their type of Hegdish, meaning even their Chulin that they're pretending is Hegdish, which halachically does become like Hegdish. Whereas Achronos, the last 5, the Kodesh of a low lechulin shenasu al taras Kodesh, when we say that they're going to apply to Hegdish, it'll only apply to actual Hegdish, whereas it won't apply to that sort of higher level Chulin that they apply. And again, the reason will be because, my time, it says the Gemara, the Chamesh Kamaisa, the first 5, the Islahu Dirara, the Tumah B'Deraisa, where they are sort of related to Tumah Deraisa, therefore, Gazr B'Hu Rabbanan, the rabbis felt the need to create a fence around not only regular Kodesh, but rather Bein LeKodesh, Bein LeChulin Shenas Al Taras HaKodesh, for both types of Hegdish. Whereas Basraisa, the second 5, they're only what? The Leslahu Dirara Ditumah B'Deraisa. They're only really a Derabanan of a Derabanan itself. And then we'll say Gazr B'Hu Rabbanan, the Kodesh, only actual Hegdish has that Gezerah, whereas the Chulin Shnas Al Taras HaKodesh, Lo Gazr B'Hu Rabbanan. So effectively, that's the end of Reb Ela. Reb Ela said the reason in the case of one Kli on top of another Kli is because of Chatzitza. You're repeating the same halacha later. There are unique reasons why by knots and unique reasons why by Kli on a Kli it's a problem. And that's Reb Ela the Shitasa, who holds that the Mishnah says 10 ideas. And those 10 ideas are split 5 and 5. The 5 top ones are because it's like similar to a Deraisa. So therefore it's going to apply to Hegdish and Chulin that was treated like Hegdish. Whereas the second 5, which are only really a concern for a derabanan, we only applied that derabanan to actual hegdish, but not to hegdish that was like contrived hegdish from chulin. Rava learns a different shot. Rava Amrami, the seifa, he's talking again back to the original question: why is one kli inside another kli a problem? Having mishum chatzitza, right? Rava Amrami, the seifa having mishum chatzitza, reisha la mishum chatzitza. I don't know what you're talking about over here. Once I already have chatzitza mentioned in the Mishnah, I don't need to repeat it. Once I have chatzitza and I know it applies to hegdish and it doesn't apply to truma, I know it in the case of the first din as well. So he says, what's the explanation for why you can't put one kli in type of another kli for hegdish, but you can for truma? The reisha hainu taima gzeira shelo yatbil machtin v'tzinoros bekli she'ein bepiv keshefayferes hano. This is a very cool halacha. So the halacha generally is, when it comes to Tumah and Tara, that in order to connect 2 separate parts of a mikvah, right, the connector, there has to be a minimum width of the hole. So if you have a mikvah that's 30 saw and another mikvah that's 30 saw, both of them are not good mikvahs. But if you can somehow connect the 30 saw and the 30 saw, you have 60 saw, you're good. But how do you connect it? So how much of a width, diameter, does the pipe that connects the 2 have to be? So it has to be at least kishifoferes hanot, which is like basically the width of like the interior spout of a canteen bottle that they used to use. Like they would store their wines and everything in these leather pouches. The top of the leather pouch is that size. It's basically, we'll see in the Gemara in a minute, it's like the distance of 2 fingers. Like you can turn your fingers over up and down like this. That would be the distance. That's called hashaka. Hashaka comes from the same language of neshika, like a kiss. It's like one mikvah is kissing the other. So that's how we actually connect mikvahs in an actual mikvah, it's through hashaka. We basically put little holes, and they connect through those holes, and it's like it's all one big mikvah, really.
How
So-
the heck do you remember all this stuff?
What?
It's amazing, by the
Ah,
way.
what do you mean? It's not remembering. I
But,
prepared it yesterday. I'll forget it tomorrow.
no, you won't. That's not.
You will not forget it.
Right.
So it says the Gemara, "Gzeira shelo yatel machtin v'tzinoros b'kli she'ein b'piv k'shefayferes hanot," meaning to say like this: one kli in type of another kli is completely 100% a kosher dunking in a mikveh, no problem. One kli in another kli, as long as the outside kli's opening is big enough that the water that's in the mikveh is viewed like it's also inside the kli. Right? Let's say I take. What's a good example? Let's say I take a wine decanter. That's a good example. Wine decanter. My wife buys me a nice, beautiful wine decanter. I want to store my scotch or my wine in it for Shabbos. I want to take it to the mikveh. It's made of glass. It needs to go to the mikveh. So now I want to put it in the mikveh, and I want to drop in, I don't know, let's say I have a small little spoon or something like that I want to put through. It could fit through. It's a small little,
Spout right through the spout.
right to the spout. So I drop it in the mikveh, the water gets in, and now inside of that decanter, you have water. My kli is sitting completely immersed in the water in there. Do we view the water that's inside the decanter as part of the mikveh, or is it almost like it's in its own thing? It all depends on how big the hole is at the top. If the hole at the top is less than 2 fingers, that's considered like a separate area code. It's like it's not part of the mikveh. Therefore, my kli that's inside it is not in a 40-saw mikveh. It's in a 30 liter, whatever, a 30,
1 liter.
whatever, 1 liter mikveh. That doesn't work. I need it to be.
The kli is inside the.
I could divide.
But think about it, yeah,
The kli is inside the decanter, and the decanter is inside the entire mikveh.
So the opening, you're saying.
If the opening is too small, even though the water's flowing, doesn't matter. The water has to flow through an opening at least as big as this kishuf aferis hanot. That is
It would be
maker.
a tiny kli anyway. Think about the
Yeah, that's why it specifically says machtin v'tzinoros, like a needle. Something like a needle
Right.
drops in. Let's say, I don't know, you're using a needle for whatever
got it,
reason. A needle
got
will
it.
fall in. So therefore, it's completely surrounded by water, but the water it's surrounded by isn't considered connected to the rest of the mikveh if the opening of that vessel is too small. So says Rava, what's the reason why one kli and another kli is a problem, even when the outside kli's got a big, huge opening? So not like a decanter, but rather like just like a nice big bowl. It's a din d'Rabbanan gzeira of this concerning for that. We're nervous if we let you dip one kli inside of another kli, which is completely kosher and completely works. But we're nervous that if we let you do that, you might think, oh, I can do the other thing also, even when the top is too small, and that's a problem. So therefore, it's a gzeira of this, I'll do that. That's where Rava explains the first case in the Mishnah, and he bases it on this halacha, kiddetzanan, like we learned in the Mishnah. Eruv mikvos, if you want to combine 2 mikvos, where both of them, or at least one of them, don't have the full 40 sa'ah needed to make the mikvah kosher, kishefoferes hanod, the size of the opening connecting the two has to be at least as big as the shefoferes hanod, which I think it means like the spout of the leather pouch. Ki'uvia, its thickness, ukechalala, and its diameter on the inside, meaning the amount has to be as big as it, not only in terms of how much space the water passes through, but how wide the actual diameter of the pipe is, right? And what's that amount? B'shtei etzbos chosros limkomon. You have to stick 2 fingers inside the area and turn your fingers over. It can't be too tight that you can't move your fingers. But either way, that's the shita of Rava. Rava says the reason in the Mishnah that you can't put one kli in another kli is gzeira d'Rabbanan, not because of chatzitza. Sover law and Rava's opinion would be consistent kehadam Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avua with the following shita of Rav Nachman in the name of Rabba bar Avua, that instead of 10 ideas mentioned in the Mishnah, rather Yud Aleph Malo Shanakam. We have 11 ideas, right? Because according to Rav Eilah, we had chatzitza mentioned twice. So the 11 dinim of the Mishnah were really saying 10 things because it was a repeat of one. Whereas according to Rava, it's really 11 separate halachas, so there's 11 milos. And therefore, those 11 milos are what's taught here. Sheish Rishonos, the first 6 is Bein LaKodesh, Bein LaChulin Shenas Al Taras HaKodesh, because they're very similar to Deraisas. Therefore, it'll apply to not only regular Kodesh, but even to Chulin that I treated like Kodesh. Whereas Achronos, the last 5, LaKodesh, it'll work. Avalo LaChulin Shenas Al Taras HaKodesh doesn't apply there, and rather there the halach is going to be like Truma. The Gemara from here, really tomorrow's daf, is going to continue the discussion of Rava and Rav Eilah, depending upon which opinion you hold, what's the nafkamina between the two of them? I mean, if they both are basically describing the Mishnah, saying that you can't do one kli inside of another kli, then what's the scenario where one would be applying their halacha and the other one wouldn't? That will pick up the Mir Hashem tomorrow.
Guess how many the art scroll has, 10 or 11.
And Tiger Ross and Kevin.
I'm guessing the art scroll listed it as
You are awesome.
11.